Good morning. Good morning, DG. Good morning, Commissioner. We are absolutely delighted to have you both here to kick off our conference. And I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So we'll probably get right into it. Commissioner, so the first question goes to you, I think. And tell us a bit more about what, in your view, drives digitization in government.
Good morning, and it's really a delight to be here, and to all of those online. I'm creating a picture in my mind, a digital picture in my mind of what to look like. People often ask me, what is our digital strategy? And I say we don't start with a digital strategy, we start with a clear business strategy. Because if you don't know what purpose digital transformation must serve, it will serve anything. So clarity of purpose right up front is key, and for us at SARS, it is always about using digital and data and technology to enhance the experience for the taxpayer. That's single-mindedly our focus, and to serve our strategic intent of voluntary compliance, which is underpinned by three objectives. The first being to make things clear and certain for taxpayers so that they understand their obligations. The second is to increasingly make tax a non-event, and we've done that for 5 million taxpayers this year. They didn't have to do anything. And the third is to detect and respond to non-compliance. So to be clear about what we want to achieve, digital transformation is driven by that, because you can also use digital transformation to solve the wrong problems. Be clear what problem you're trying to solve. Digital transformation often will accelerate inefficiency. If you're fundamental thinking about what you're trying to achieve, you'll just get to the wrong answer faster. If you're using digitalization, or you're fine-tuning uncertainty, hoping to get a better answer. So for me, that's the important thing. Clarity about what purpose digitalization must serve, and then a relentless focus to building that and nothing else.
Thanks. So Duncan, I think a similar question from my side. In your view, what drives digitization in government?
Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. Look, along the same lines as the Commissioner, I think in government, in sort of broad terms, one can think about the role of digitization in two ways. For service delivery departments, it's about how do you use data and data analytics to enhance the service delivery experience for those citizens that you serve, whether this is Home Affairs or any other department that has primarily a service delivery orientation. For policy departments like the National Treasury, I think it's slightly different. For policy departments like the Treasury, it's about how do you use data analytics to inform policy and to create better quality policies that are more evidence-based by enhancing data. And we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit later in terms of how certainly we've worked with our own data and our own data analytics capability to ensure that we can deliver better policy outcomes.
Okay, great stuff. So for those of you in the audience and online, Vusi took us through Slido. If you have any questions for the DG or Commissioner, could you please type it in and we'll deal with it towards the end of the session. So Commissioner, could you tell us more about how SARS has used technology in recent years to help the taxpayer, to make it, as you call it, a non-event?
Yeah, I just received a few minutes ago 3 pictures of our two-pot dashboard, because that's the most recent development, and if the audio people can put that up in the meantime. But let me talk about, so for us, if I take the individual taxpayer, about 60% of our 8 million returns that we expect are from standard income earners. And we've worked very hard to say we want to eliminate the need for 5 million people to do anything to fulfill their obligations. And so we use only third-party data from local banks, retirement funds, medical schemes, and international banks where South Africans may have assets. We use all of that data, plus the payroll data from the employees, and then our tax processing engine has the rules of assessment, the rules to compute the assessment outcome. And once the outcome is produced, it goes into a second phase, which is testing the outcome for any risks of fraud or impermissible deductions or non-compliance. And only then the outcome is transmitted to the taxpayer. So for 5 million taxpayers, they don't have to do anything. We'll do the data science work. We'll have built machine learning algorithms to produce the outcome. Just that work, as I said, we have had this season a 98% acceptance rate of the outcome that we had. The 2% of those who chose to edit their returns, about half of them didn't change anything, the same answer, and the other 1% then changed it. If they've edited their returns and submitted it to SARS, they will get an assessment outcome in under 5 seconds.
Sure.
Now, think about this. Our workload over the last 10 years have increased by about 240%. In the last 10 years, we added just more than 14.5 million new taxpayers. Imagine a world where we have to capture every return, make sure there are no errors, then hand it over to our assessment staff, who will pour their minds on it and detect anything missing or anything irregular, and then produce an assessment outcome. We could never do that today successfully, and that will have a huge impact on the country's revenue because every declaration either has a positive or a negative outcome. Another example is customs declarations processing, whereas again it was manual, it was paper-driven. Today, those declarations are, by the taxpayer, the trader, are inputted into our system. They will get a declarations outcome in 7 seconds, and so they will know that the declaration has been submitted and what the outcome is, including building the risk engine behind that. So you can see both of them I describe as experiences to the taxpayer or the trader. Of course, in doing that, we are also enhancing our operating model to be more efficient, more transparent, more effective in the execution of our mandate. So we are a huge beneficiary. We're working with 2 other government agencies, and I'll talk about that later, because I think there's a huge opportunity for us to work together and to leverage the core capability that SARS has built over the last 2 decades. But let me pause there for now.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Duncan, could you share Treasury's experiences in using data and technology?
So I think one of the best, more recent case studies is what happened out of necessity mainly during COVID on the social relief of distress grant. And often it's these sort of crisis situations that can initiate quite significant changes from the state's ability to leverage technology to have a very good impact. Because of COVID and because of the lockdown, the government very quickly had to harness digital means to enroll and verify social relief of distress grant applicants. The traditional way of doing it was a SASSA grant officer. The South African Social Security Agency had to manually enroll people. It was typically characterized by quite long queues. But because of the lockdown and because of COVID, SASSA, with the help of other government departments, and the Treasury played a role here as well, transitioned to digital enrollment and verification. On the enrollment side, via WhatsApp, via SMS, and through websites and so on. And on the verification side, we introduced innovations in our social grant system that weren't there before. Firstly, on the verification side, we were able to start leveraging other databases in order to ensure that those who were applying for the Social Relief of Distress grant were actually rightfully allowed to receive it. Whether these are UIF databases, Home Affairs databases, NSFAS databases, and so on. So you're able to harness the power of a lot of the administrative data that already exists in the state in order to check and verify eligibility. Secondly, because the Social Relief of Distress grant is a means-tested grant, which means it's tested against your income, for the first time in the grant system, we introduced cross-checking of income records with commercial banks. So we signed MOUs with our with all the major commercial banks, where we were then able to verify the income of individuals and use that as a mechanism to implement the means test. And I think these two innovations, along with how we then started to pay the grants via EFTs as opposed to cash disbursements, although there are still some limited number of cash disbursements, represented quite a significant change in our social grant landscape. What's happening now, on the Social Relief of Distress grant, you're talking about 8 to 10 million beneficiaries. And of course, we have many more millions of beneficiaries that also receive old age pension grants and child support grants and so on. What's happening now is that we are extending the lessons from the SRD into the other grant space. How do we implement the lessons from the SRD on verification and enrollment to our other grants in order to improve the quality of the grant beneficiaries' experience, but B, the value for money of the taxpayer resources that are being directed into a social safety net. And finally, I think what's going to be important, and this is ongoing work between the Treasury and the Department of Social Development, and it will require the help of SARS and others, is to eventually transition to a social security register, where all of our grant recipients are on a common register that is cross-checked against all the databases so that we can provide a much more integrated service to citizens, whether you are a UIF beneficiary or a social grant recipient.
Okay, thank you. So it's really good to hear that we're learning and we're using the lessons from the use of innovative technology, and we're extending that throughout government. And in this case, particularly with regards to SASSA, and how many beneficiaries do we have? 21 million people?
In total, yes, around 21 million.
So that's making 21 million lives a bit better and a bit easier. Okay. Commissioner, we have a question from William online, and while we're talking about SARS and how you've used technology, William wants to know, how does SARS use AI in calculating the tax obligations and during the assessment process?
So if they can put up the slides, I want to refer to that. But let me first say that we have built a fraud risk detection capability that uses machine learning and AI. Mm-hmm. So there's no human intervention with that. That alerts a taxpayer declaration for compliance risk perspective, and then we hand that over to our employees who do verification of those returns. The alert rate at the moment is 20% and under 20%, and we're trying to work that even further down. And the next stage of our development would use AI now to do the verification and not have people do the verification. Because anything for which you can write a script, in other words, a set of rules or an algorithm, can be done better, faster, more accurately than any human being can ever do. And so that's the next stage of that development. But we always start with the end in mind. So, for example, the objective of serving a taxpayer leads the enforcement of taxpayers, which is why we've used AI technology to give a seamless experience for 5 million people, while at the same time, at the back of that, we've paid to date on the filing season 22.5 billion rand of refunds already to about 2.6 million taxpayers. And that's an average of over 8,000 per taxpayer, which is great for the economy because that has the multiplier effect, gets the money back into spending, and therefore there's a virtuous circle there. And then secondly, in doing that, we still have been able to provide an assessment outcome in under 7 seconds and detect impermissible refunds of just over 10 billion so far. And that's the benefit. We raise additional taxes, we prevent impermissible refunds whilst creating this seamless experience. One of the things that have really occupied us is we were put under tremendous pressure, the DG will confirm, by having a date of two-pot system imposed on us. We didn't have a choice. And so we had to get ready again because we knew on the 1st of September, what is the experience? I want money, I need to submit a directive. The longer I wait for the directive, the longer I will wait for my money. So we were single-mindedly focused up until over the weekend to say, how do we ensure through AI-driven rules that we can supply a directive in the same time we can do an assessment, in other words, in under 5 seconds. And then ask ourselves, what are the obstacles that would prevent that? In our case, if you're not registered for tax, if you have outstanding returns, or if you have outstanding money. And so we address those issues ahead of time. And we measure that in real time. So I can tell you, for example, if you look at the screen, that as of last night, we have received all 2,759 directives. We've already completed 2424.
Sure.
That is asking for 103 million rand from their retirement funds and will deliver 6.7 million of tax to the fiscus. So this is the kind of stuff we build. Behind this sits a lot of rules, a lot of data crunching, a lot of AI in order to do this in this way. The next slide shows you by fund. So these are the list of funds that have submitted directives and whether it's the status and the money. And then the third slide gives you a similar view. So behind all of this, in order to deliver a seamless experience by providing a directive almost instantaneously, we have made it a near non-event. And taxpayers can get access to their retirement fund.
Thank
So that
you.
would be a very, very current example.
Yes. The two-pot system started, for those that don't know, on the 1st of September this year. So this is hot off the press data. Fantastic. So let me ask the DG of Treasury. So Treasury needs a lot of data to run its economic models, to understand policy better, to understand the implications of policy. Can you share with us your experience of using big data and big data analytics in the policy-making process, but also around the economic modeling?
So, I mean, there's quite a lot of, and I think you've summarized it well, because internally we have to have quite a lot of research and modeling capability to advise the minister, advise cabinet and parliament on things like the fiscal framework, the macroeconomic outlook, how we should be executing our borrowing program or our funding strategy. But I think one very good example on the big data side is, I think, a very successful collaboration we've had with SARS, with the Revenue Service. And it started around 2014, 2015, And for those of you who don't know, and we referred to this earlier, the government in its normal course of doing business collects quite a lot of administrative data. This is very different to survey data collected by Stats SA for a very particular purpose, like the census or the labor force survey or the quarterly employment statistics. We collect tax data, we collect UIF data, we collect education data, we have home affairs data, and so on. And in around 2014-15, we were one of the first countries in the world, actually, to start thinking about how do we bring anonymized tax data into the National Treasury, to improve the modeling work that we do, but also some of the policy work. And it started on a very small scale. It started with 3 computers, a couple of data analysts. We brought the anonymized tax data, corporate income tax, personal income tax data in, and started working through the data, cleaning it. Because of the initial success of that program and the interest from academics also in using the data, we then transitioned in about 2017 or so, where we introduced a data lab with its own server capacity, its own security arrangements, where we would invite academics alongside Treasury staff to work on the data. One of the big benefits of that kind of approach is that in using the data for their academic purposes, the academics were also helping us to clean the data. And to standardize the data. So they were helping to generate this public good. And the lab, I think, has gone from strength to strength over the years and has been, in fact, a global example of how a government can use administrative tax data to inform its modeling work and to inform its policy work. So today, there's a lab in the National Treasury, which academics can access, other government departments can access. It houses the tax data, anonymized. So now we, for example, have a panel of a section of the labor market, taxpayers, over time that we are able to track and help us to think through what are the impacts of certain policy changes on taxpayers. And we have the same for corporates. We have a company panel over time that helps us to track corporate behavior and can allow us now to do the kinds of assessments on our policy changes that weren't possible before. So if you go to our SA Tide website, which is the collaboration under which we collaborate with SARS and others on this project, you'll find some of the research that's been done there. Many of the papers co-written with Treasury officials. A recent paper that was published a few weeks ago used the data in the data lab to assess the impact of changes of the top marginal tax rate on the wealthiest taxpayers. How do these taxpayers respond to changes in the top tax rate? And we are able to see, for example, that in fact, changing the top tax rate because of the way taxpayers are able to manage their tax affairs actually brings in a lot less revenue than you would anticipate. And so that's the kind of very real research that then helps inform us in our policy positions, but can also be used quite directly as part of our modeling and other exercises.
Great. I want to circle back to the Commissioner, and these are questions coming through from our online participants. Could you tell us, as SARS, you have driven the adoption of technology in government. You know, you're at the forefront of technological adoption. And one of the interesting things for us to understand were what are some of the barriers that you might have faced as an institution in the public sector in driving the adoption of technology. And there are a number of questions online around how do you get staff buy-in, because presumably, you know, it might threaten staff jobs and the way we do things. So could you share SARS's experience there?
Circle back and offer you some water.
Thanks. Thank you.
There's something.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Could you use the mic?
let me first say, and Duncan will agree with me, any collaboration in government is like pushing water uphill. We don't work well together. But there's a couple of things we could do as a whole of government that could enable that. For example, we are really advocating strongly for a unique digital identity for every citizen, every resident, and every business. So that wherever they pop up in government, whether it is, and we'll be able to see how people are double dipping, for example, into the social grant system while also getting a tax rebate and refund. And so by entering a single identifier into any of our databases, we can see the connection to other databases. And so a single digital identity will strengthen the integrity of our entire financial system, because we'll be able to track stocks and flows of financial assets. And SARS can't do that. That has to be driven by the head of state, by president almost. Other countries have appointed a chief information officer or chief technology officer in the office of the president or the prime minister. Then it's not two DGs arm wrestling itself, but it comes from the high authority. So let me give you a very simple example of we've been a partner to Home Affairs for many years. And then something happened and Home Affairs wants to go on their own, and then it doesn't work, and they come back to us. And we've been around that block. So we had a meeting with the Minister of Home Affairs, and he said, if you can make an assessment, produce an assessment outcome in under 5 seconds, why can't you do it for a visa application? Provide a visa in under 5 seconds. So we've taken on the challenge and working with Home Affairs to deliver something like that over the next 6 to 12 months, using one country as an example. We are desperately interdependent with the Hawks, with the NPA, to ensure that tax and financial crime is ultimately prosecuted. The law allows us for information exchange protocols, but if you don't have an information sharing culture, you're never going to share information. You then become a data imperialist, and you sit on your data as if it's yours. And so we have to address, at a policy, at a strategic, and as a practice level, how do we make data accessible where the version of the truth is only once? Of course, partitioned by mandates. The only purpose to which SARS can use data is for tax purposes, not for any other purpose. For example, surveying national security. The law, the Constitution, mandates us to work together, but we don't often work together. And SARS's Act was actually very smartly written that allows SARS to do anything for any other agent in government. So when we help Home Affairs or Treasury or GTAC, the law actually permits that. So those instruments are in place. It is about the culture of sharing and collaboration. That is our biggest barrier at the moment, not the technology. The second issue I touched on earlier on is about what purpose data must serve. Because if you're not clear about that, then you don't have the sense of urgency. It's like having a pile of bricks. Bricks, data and bricks, if you make that analogy, the same pile of bricks can produce a prison cell, a wonderful bedroom, a restaurant, or a hospital. So you have to start with what is it that you want the bricks to do, and not just organize the bricks and hope you find something out. So that's the second issue in terms of a clear purpose becomes the barrier. We don't have a common purpose for the whole of e-government. And an entity like SARS on its own can't define that. So what we have done is we've said we will help where we can and hopefully demonstrate the power of collaboration. We are currently busy with a project with the SARB for an instant payment system. And we knew from the beginning that people will not move from cash form of payment to instant payment system if it isn't as easy, as safe, and as effortless as cash. So we are working with SARB to build an instant payment system that has zero cost to the clients and near zero cost to the service providers on the platform. And then the safety that cash doesn't have, which is get lost or stolen. We started that project a few months ago, working with the Reserve Bank. From the example in Brazil, which is one of the models we looked at, they've increased their financial inclusion to over 90%. And they've increased or decreased their cash flow in the system from about mid 70% to under 50%. So these are some of the barriers that we have to overcome if we want ultimately an e-government. Clarity of purpose, build the right organizational arrangement, and government is organized inefficiently because you have ministries that act as silos, and so there isn't a whole of government interdisciplinary approach. So that requires policy change, it requires strong leadership, and then the culture of collaboration, which if it isn't there, makes it difficult to work together because everyone is working to their own agenda, not to the broader agenda.
Yep.
Maybe give just one last point of perverse incentives. So between SARS and the NPA, we prepare a case file for prosecution. We have set ourselves the standard that that case file must be prosecutor, with the prosecutor involvement and prosecution ready. But NPA is measured on the number of successful prosecutions. So there's a perverse incentive for them to then take the simplest cases, like an outstanding return, at the expense of a more complex money laundering or criminal tax crime. So we also have to look at how each department is incentivized and how do you create a KPI that doesn't necessarily measure the performance of the department, but of the entire, for example, in our case, the entire criminal judiciary system, and what is the ultimate criteria and measure of success there. So until we do those things, we will always struggle to work together and to fully leverage the inordinate power that data and technology provides.
Thank you. So Duncan, perhaps you could talk to the barriers that you see from a whole of government perspective. So what are the barriers to digitization in South Africa? And perhaps you could add to the Commissioner's answer, particularly touching on this point of intergovernmental collaboration and collaboration between departments, but I'm assuming, Commissioner, it was also across spheres of government.
Yeah, look, I think the Commissioner is right. I think a digital agenda for government has to be led at the level of the presidency. And so one of the decisions that we've made, and some of the people here might be familiar with the work that we've done under Operation Vulindlela, which is a joint initiative between the presidency and the Treasury to advance certain structural reforms, as part of the second phase of the collaboration between the Treasury and the presidency, but also bringing in the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, is to work on digital public infrastructure. So it's led by the presidency and by the staff there, but pulling in all the relevant departments. And one of the tasks that this team has to work on is, for example, the issue of the digital identity, which we think is quite important, but also just building the basic mechanisms for government departments to collaborate on their digital activities, embed sort of data analytics in their day-to-day work, and see what we are doing is working on a few pilots with a few of the critical departments in order to expand the use of digital public infrastructure. I mean, the social grant example I cited earlier is a very good one, because you have lessons from the social relief of distress. Yeah. You need to now implement that on a much broader and much wider scale. And so doing that through the presidency, I think, is a good starting point. So we are heading in that direction. But I think there are probably 2 or 3 other challenges I would highlight, and I'm sure the Commissioner would agree with me on the first one, which is the availability of data scientists.
Yeah.
What we've discovered through our own activities, in particular the data lab, is that there are simply not enough data scientists available. I think we've worked quite well together with SARS to share resources and share data science capabilities, and I think it's a very good a model for how some of these scarce resources have, in certain instances, worked seamlessly between the team at SARS and the team at the National Treasury, and that's something that I think has wider applicability for the rest of government. Interestingly, I had a conversation with one of the professors at the University of Stellenbosch, and they are now introducing data science as part of the compulsory modules for their economics graduate programs. So increasingly more and more, even in the social sciences, more and more faculties are seeing a reason to bring data science expertise into their curricula. And I think that's something that I think is quite important. I think the second issue is the issue of cost. Data scientists are expensive, but the infrastructure itself is also quite expensive. And not only is it expensive, but also many government departments, the National Treasury included, does not have the core expertise in order to fully transition to adopt some of the new digital infrastructure and to engage with the OEMs, with the original equipment manufacturers, around what our needs are and how those needs should be delivered. Yeah. And I think that's another core area. The cost of the transition to digital infrastructure, the ability for departments to be able to undertake that transition in terms of their own internal capabilities, and then also the scarcity and the costs of data scientists.
Okay. Thank you.
You asked about the people issue. Can I quickly speak to the people issue? So the first thing is...
You have to use your mic.
we often forget that in any transformation, people and the development of people has the longest lead time. The data and the technology side are actually fairly easy. But preparing people for the digital future is often missed. The other day I met with my senior executives. I'd given them an assignment about 18 months ago to start redrafting every single job in SARS on a 5-ladder career progression with beginner, intermediate, general proficient, advanced, and mastery. They're struggling with that. So the other day when I had all of them in the room, I did a demonstration to them, calling up my AI agent that I work with, and asked the AI agent, please provide me with the job description for the generally proficient tax auditor. And the AI agent wrote it. Then I said, can you please redraft this, customized for SARS, and it rewrote it using SARS language. Then I said, can you now provide me with a training program to prepare someone to become a generally proficient tax auditor, and he did the training program. I went on, I said, what would be the key performance indicators? I said, can you provide me a performance contract? And then I said, now can you write me a machine learning code that will help me manage the performance of a tax auditor? And it wrote it in code using machine learning. I then said, can you rewrite this using deep learning and LLM? And it did that for me. I then said, give me the salary ranges in the South African market for all 5 levels, and it gave me the salary levels, and then I said, now can you write me an advert, because I want to go to the market and look for one. And I did all of this in 30 minutes in front of everyone. And the point was, to my HR practitioners, if you're not upskilling yourself for this future, you will become irrelevant. Data science is hard, so you have to do both. We were fortunate, we just appointed earlier this year a chief data scientist, female by the way, for those of you who want to know, female data scientist. I thought I'd get a clap for that. From industry, and a chief technology innovation officer from industry. But you have to invest in your people you already have and upskill them. And today, it's relatively easy to be upskilled if you are keen to learn. So people should not feel threatened. Digital transformation over all of the experiences have disintermediated some jobs, but it has created new jobs and new industries that didn't exist before. The problem is that Africa is at the moment, by the most researchers, creating a half a new job for every one job that is being destroyed, while in Asia, they're creating between 2 and 3 jobs for every job that's being disintermediated. So we need to up our game. Our school delivery system doesn't prepare people for the future world of work. If you engage in rote learning rather than understanding, if you don't develop curiosity, collaboration, and communication as the future skills. So we have to start addressing the people issue already from school through to university, and then an investment in the people we already have employed. Then you don't have to be scared. In fact, I'm quite excited about that.
It's changing times. Duncan, there's a question for you online from Will. And he was asking, how do you integrate public sector entity data, SOE data, in order to analyze it? And could you share some examples with us?
So we've, I think about a year or so ago, we started on a very exciting project to bring entity procurement data into the National Treasury, and to clean the data, standardize the data, and start using it for our own policy insights. Typically, the way we get SOE data, because one of the oversight functions we have in our asset and liability management division is for the financial performance of what we call Schedule 2 entities, Eskom, Transnet, and so on. But we don't have a lot of direct line of sight over their actual data. One reason we don't is because, with the exception of Eskom, many of these entities don't yet have integrated financial systems across their different business units. So it's very difficult to get integrated data from them. Number one. Number two, we haven't typically had the capability or the resources to be able to integrate and interrogate large chunks of data, which we now have with the data lab. So about a year or so ago, we started getting procurement data initially first from Eskom and Transnet. We had a data science team from Wits University that worked with us, obviously in an anonymized setting, to work through some of the data. And the insights that we've been able to get from the data has been fascinating. There's another step to that. Once you start taking the procurement data and you start matching it with other types of data sets, like Persal data, for example, which is a database where all government civil servants, employees are registered, then you can start getting very interesting insights about, for example, government employees that are doing business with SOCs that are either not allowed to or has not declared those activities. So that for us was the sort of the initial step, starting with Eskom and with Transnet. We plan to roll that out on a much greater scale, and then the final step of that, which is what we are working towards, is then making that data public, and making it public at a transaction level, so that in the same way that that researchers are able to use the tax data for policy insights, the public and other researchers would now have access to procurement data that they are able to then validate for value for money, to understand procurement trends, and to understand how we can better allocate our resources.
And that will probably feed into procurement reforms and help support the implementation of the procurement bill, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's the point I think the Commission made earlier. We don't gather data for its own sake. We set up the system so that once we are able to analyze the data, we can use it for policy insights. For example, in the case of the procurement bill, we plan to have sector-specific procurement regulations that are tailored to the needs of each sector. And so the procurement data that we're getting from SOCs, for example, are going to be very important to help us draft effective sector regulations.
Okay. Commissioner, I think our time is almost up, but there is a last question that the audience wants you to answer, and that is, how much of taxpayers' money do you spend on IT in SARS?
Far too little. Far too little.
Could you use the mic again?
Yeah, far too little. I mean, we engaged with the Minister and the DG of the Treasury earlier this week to map out that in the next 3 years, just for modernization of SARS, we'll need about R1 billion a year within our allocation. But we can also demonstrate that the R1 billion has a huge return on investment. We did a project. We did a project in the last 9 months where Treasury made an allocation to us of R1 billion. We ring-fenced a project and returned 22 billion rand. Sorry, in total, it'll be 63 times the money back when we finish the project. No other investment is going to give you 63 times your money back.
Yeah, that's a great
The important point for me is just to elaborate what the DG has said. The first is that if I had a magic wand, I would do two things. Apart from the digital identity and funding the investment, the first is I'll create a common payment system for anyone who does business with government to use that payment system, no other payment system. That is able to then track the expenditure, where it comes from, where it goes to, what it's for. At the moment, we don't have that. The second is a common disbursement platform. We have SARS that disperses over 400 billion rand, probably most accurately than any other agency in the form of refunds. Then we have SASSA with their platform. Then we have Labour Department, UIF with their platform. So we have multiple platforms for government disbursing money to citizens and services. So a common platform for the disbursement of money would be two big things for me that will enhance our financial integrity. I want to just make the point quickly on we work exceptionally hard to ensure, because I saw a question on data privacy, to build an environment that is secure, and touch wood, we haven't had a significant incident, but we are hacked all the time. And we periodically, very low profile, no one knows when we do it, we do ethical hacking. We try and break into our own systems to ensure that it's secure.
White hats.
And then in the use of AI, we have a very explicit objective for ethical AI. Because again, AI can be quite intimidating, but it can also be used to serve nefarious purposes. So we're very clear that one of the considerations in our playbook for digital transformation is ethical AI, in addition to the security of data, protection against cybercrime, and data confidentiality. You will know that we have gone to the highest court in the land to argue the principle of confidentiality and treating that data sacrosanct. Taxpayers would not trust us if they thought that we were careless with their very, very private financial information.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes left. Looking ahead, last question, looking ahead, what are the strategic priorities for the National Treasury when it comes to digitization?
Well, I think in our case, we've, like the Commissioner indicated earlier, we've also just appointed the National Treasury's first Chief Data Analytics Officer. And I must, now that the Commissioner has done it, I have to outdo him.
Okay.
Because Dr. Ayanda Schlatzwayo is in the room.
Yes, Ayanda, stand up.
And she is, and she's agreed to take on the very brave task of dragging the National Treasury kicking and screaming into a future where We are embedding data analytics in our research and our policy analysis process. Two, she's working, and she started with one of our divisions, but she's working with various of our divisions to automate some of our processes. There are many processes in the National Treasury that could benefit from some of what the Commissioner was talking about, but also just process automation. How we execute our borrowing strategy, how we assess certain requests that we get, and so on. And so her task that she's embarked upon has started with a data maturity assessment of the National Treasury, where she wants to understand what the ability is for the institution, and what skills do we have available, and how do we upskill our staff in order to take the next step. Another important part of her work, working with the colleagues in the data lab, is also to facilitate internal capacity building. We have a lot of excellent resources in the National Treasury. We are running many of our own training sessions on R and Stata and MATLAB and other software packages that the staff can use to implement some of the activities we want to take forward. So I think it's exciting work, and we look forward to seeing what impact that can have on the organization.
Thank you. And with that, we've come to the end of our session. I would like to thank the Commissioner and the DG for talking to us today and for kicking off the Public Economics Conference. We wish all the delegates online and in the room well over the next 2.5 days. And Vusi, I don't know where he is, but I'm handing back to you.